Hey everybody. So today I'm going to be doing a basic electronics video specifically covering lights in cosplay. I've talked to and heard from a number of people that are mostly intimidated by it. They're intimidated by the idea of trying to put lights in their cosplay. They have some assumptions of what they might have to do, like putting in resistors and calculating things and numbers and stuff like that. And it's really not that difficult. And if you're using some of the things that I use in mine, you'll never need to use resistors. You just need to know what voltage that you're working with. And I only really work in 3 to 5 volts. There's no reason to go too much higher. So I'm going to be covering a bunch of that today. First, I'll be covering what lights I use and what lights I might suggest. I'll be covering what kind of battery packs and power options there are. So from like power bank, USB power banks to actual like little packs that can hold batteries like coin cell batteries and AA batteries and things like that. And then last, it will be how to wire things up. And potentially you might have to use soldering, but I know soldering's a pain in the butt. So I'll also try to show ways that you can avoid soldering for like the very beginners that maybe don't have access to that stuff. And accessibility issues, if we're being entirely honest. So I'm going to try to cover as much as I can today about basic cosplay lighting and electronics. So next in the video, I'm going to be showing an example of the kind of things that I've made that, again, they light up pretty well on a convention floor or in a bright room, et cetera, et cetera. And then after that, we'll get right into it. So here we go.
So first thing we have here is the Mercury hammer that has a lot of lights in it and a bunch of other electronics like servos and motors and things. Obviously, we won't be covering the servos and motors, but you can see how bright the lights are in just a typical room. Same thing goes for a convention. And next we have Vi's Atlas gauntlets, which again, very bright in a convention. And then we have here FCG, his eyes very bright in a well-lit room for a video. And last is Goblin Slayer's helmet with a very bright pinpoint eyeball.
Okay, let's get on to the lights. So ahead of time here, I've set up the lights on a breadboard to show you guys how bright these lights can be, give examples, things like that. What you will notice here is I don't have any resistors. And that's something I made a point of earlier, is for this kind of stuff, you don't need resistors. Truthfully, even if you're using, say, 5 volts and you only have a 3-volt light, you don't necessarily need a resistor, but you might burn the light out a little bit sooner. But with this kind of stuff that we're doing, we don't really need resistors, so don't sweat that stuff. Don't think, how do I calculate for a resistor and all that kind of thing. We're not playing with that here on these. So first thing is the LEDs that most people are aware of. And we have right here. Ooh, there we go. So these little LEDs are the things that most people are aware of. When you're wiring them, the short leg is the negative and the long leg is the positive. That might be important if you decide to use these particular LEDs. Oh, zoom in, there we go. You can get them, of course, in bags, and they're relatively dirt cheap. They're not terribly expensive, but they're also not super bright unless you're looking straight at them. So they're not, they don't really shine a whole lot of light out to the sides, unlike some of these chip-on boards ones that you'll see. Excuse me. So here's an example of that. Let me light that one up so you can see how bright that is. Lights up the area around it. Okay, but you have to lift my hand up for my hand to start really being lit up by the green, and it's definitely bright looking straight at the camera. Another one that I'm going to show you guys, and this one actually just for fun, is flicker LEDs. So, well, here we go. These ones here. These aren't going to be bright enough to be useful at a convention, but if you ever wanted to use a fun little light to simulate a candle, because these will be found in things like fake tea lights, you can do that. So let me just turn that on. You can see the pulsing there. So I'm just showing you these guys, or showing you these lights because I have them and I thought they were fun. So if anybody wanted to use those for more of a darker room, then those are an option too. But on to the stuff that I use. And please excuse me clearing my throat here. So let's see. First one. These chip-on board is what they're called, chip-on board LEDs. They have, obviously, what implies a little chip inside them that generally makes them brighter. There's a measure for light called lumens, Really, that's just a measure of how bright anything is. And the basic little LEDs are something like 10 lumens or something like that, not very high wattage. These kind of lights here can be somewhere around, I think, the lower end ones are something like 100 lumens. You know, they can get up to like 1,000 or something like that. So these are much brighter, literally the same voltage, just 3 volts. You can get 5-volt ones as well. So these here, again, not terribly large. You can see in my hand. And then we have the plus contact and negative contact for when you're soldering the wires on. There's not a whole lot of getting around these ones. If you're using these, you're soldering them, and it'll be the same thing for the other chip on board that I will show you later. But it's just a small amount of soldering. And so here's an example of the brightness. So if I turn that on, let's do that. So you can have kind of an idea of how bright it is, and you can see how it's lighting up much more of my hand than even the little green one was. They look about the same brightness, but the light shining in all directions is considerably brighter. So don't necessarily rely on what you can see looking in the camera, because cameras tend to lie when it comes to LEDs. Ooh, get that back there. And then the other ones, when it comes to using other chip on board lights, specifically for that Goblin Slayer helmet that you saw, these are the little guys that I use for that kind of stuff. Oh, wait, nope, there we go. Yeah, it's just a tiny little chip on board LED, but the amount of light this thing puts out puts that green one to shame. And you can still have them in a bag like this for 25 bucks. So if you can swing 25 bucks, you can get 50 of these LEDs, so 50 cents each, as opposed to, say, going to a dollar store, ripping something open, getting the LEDs out of it, and wasting what the LED was in. And so this, you might end up having a few more for quite a while, but you create less plastic waste instead of just ripping apart something at the dollar store and chucking the garbage. So the brightness for those, let's see here. Let's see how bright that is. And you can see it's lighting up everything. So even the post that this camera's on, look how red that is. Looks like a lightsaber. These kind of things, no joke, will blind you a little bit if you're looking right at them when they turn on. You'll be blinking red lights out of your eyes for a little bit. I did that to Elfie when I was setting up the Goblin Slayer helmet. And I came out asking, how does this show up? And she couldn't look right at it because, again, it's crazy bright. And I just did that to myself. I just looked around this phone and blinded myself a little bit. Go me. I will compare this to some of the other ones here. So, like, let's see the green one. You can see just right away how much brighter that is. Because if I turn that off, it's not really lighting up that post all that well. This, lighting up post a lot. If I come back over to this one, wait, there we go. Even that one's lighting up the post a lot. So that's a fairly good measure as well, but just how bright these things are. And last, and this is something that's used in a number of things as well, is this guy here. This is a flexible chip on board strip. So like this here, they come in large rolls. They'll normally have a USB attached to them, but these ones here have been snipped off because I've used them. So this is the red one that's used in FCG's eyes, for example. And the red strip is set behind the blue strip, behind transparent PETG. And yet in the pictures and at a convention, you can clearly see his eyes are quite red when I switch them over to red, even though they're not, say, right up against the transparent print. We got some green ones here, and they have their contact points here. These ones, I do have tricks instead of soldering that I will show you later that, so you can get around the soldering and do a lot less of that. This is actually how this one's held together right now. But I will show you the brightness of it. I turn that on. And again, because cameras, when it comes to LEDs, tend to lie or do weird things, you can see how the brightness of it is washing out the cutting mat that I have here, and it's kind of gets a little bit weird. And same thing, even from here, you can start seeing that like this post is lighting up blue just from how much it throws light. FCG, like I said, has the blue eyes in him. Those are the ones that are closer to the outside of the eyes. You'll see these blue lights in the Viatlas gauntlets and in the Mercury hammer. And as you've seen in the images previous, those light up really well at a convention. And also, like in my room when I'm showing some of the videos and stuff like that, these are great. And these ones are actually 5 volts. So you can just hook up a typical power pack, battery bank, whatever you want to call them, to these, and they will light up very well. And I can get my mercury hammer to stay lit for about, I think it's 4 hours or so. And there's a lot of lights in that mercury hammer. I believe the eyes on FCG are a similar amount before I have to swap out the battery pack, but then there's also servo motors being run off of that as well, which is actually the same thing there. So you got lights in the servo motors. Even though there's less lights, it still burns out in about the same amount of time. So I had to replace it within about 4 hours or so. But that's still quite a bit when you're at a convention. Bring 2 battery packs, you're good. So that's the lights and some examples of the lights that I use. Next, we will move on to the batteries. So battery packs, small, large, all sorts of different stuff, neat little tricks. Okay, let's get to power next, because lights are first. You need to know what you're going to use to know what power you need. So everybody's familiar with things like power packs, battery packs, etc., USB rechargeable things. They come in a lot of different sizes. They can even get them in cylinders like this, which is really good for things like swords, putting them in a handle. This is the battery pack that we use on the Vi gauntlet, the Atlas gauntlet, and it sits in there quite nicely. It has I think it's 5, yeah. So these power packs come in, let's see there, come on. Yeah, there we go. They come in different capacities, and capacities are generally done by milliamp hours. Now, here's the numbers and the math that a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable with. You don't really have to know, just, you can run tests when you have your lights, turn them on, see how long it takes to burn, or I keep saying burn out, but that's not the right word. See how long it takes to actually run out of juice on your batteries and your power packs. Come on. So this has 5,000 milliamp hours, which really means how many milliamps does something consume. Like, say some of these chip-on boards might consume like 200 milliamps, and that just gives you an idea of how long it can last. Milliamp hours means if something uses 5,000 milliamps, it lasts for an hour. And then the math just comes from that one. So if it's only 200 milliamps, let's say it's 500 milliamps, then, et cetera, et cetera. The math is not hard, but it's also not important if you just do a test to see how long something lasts, because it could be variable. Okay, away from the scary numbers now. So yes, we have various sizes of these things here. So this one here is 10,400 milliamps. So that's twice the capacity as this one here. And then we have this big chunky boy here that's actually fairly heavy. What's this one sitting at? That's 20,000 milliamps. So that's double capacity yet again. And some of these can actually put out 12 volts and 9 volts instead of 5 volts. So if you were to look at, let's see if I can get this to show here. So if you were to look at this information here, you can see certain outputs do put out 9 volts and 12 volts. So you can get a higher output on some of these if it's required. Generally isn't, but just something to keep aware of. And then you have big chunky things like this. This is a rechargeable, just like some of the other stuff that you would normally see. This has a capacity of 6 amp hours, so that's a lot more instead of milliamps. Excuse me with the clearing of the throat. But these can actually put out 12 volts from here and then 5 volts from here. You can use these if you're ever going to use that kind of power, but you don't really need that. But if you want really bright lights, you can get 12 volt chip-on boards that will really, really light up. You can use things like this, but you can see how big they are. That's going to be in something like a large armor build and stuff like that, as opposed to something reasonable. This battery pack actually here is one that we use both in FCG and in the mercury hammer. So this sits up inside the mercury hammer head, and USB gets connected to there, or this sits inside FCG's torso in a little clamped spot, and then USBs are put in there to power like lights and servos and things like that. So this one's pretty versatile. I have a couple of these, obviously, because we need 2 per convention, generally speaking. Love these things. But you don't always need them. If you want to use regular batteries, there are lots of options for that. So for just AAA batteries, again, let's go back to the 3-volt stuff we were talking about before. You can get things like this. This is one I previously spliced for actually the mercury hammer, and then swapped it out for more juice. But yeah, they'll come with the black and red wires, and then you can use, and I'll cover stuff like this later. You can use things like wire strippers and stuff like that to then get the wires down to the right size, or if they have a different connector on the end, to knock that connector off. But yeah, you just plug that stuff in there. There are also versions like this, which is a similar thing, where you can just put the batteries in there, and they have the red and the black wires, but they also have a switch on it. So this has an on-off switch with it. You don't have to worry about wiring a switch together with the thing and figuring that out, soldering that, yada, yada, yada. You just got this, you're done. And then you can just connect it to something like this. This isn't enough voltage for it, but you can just basically put it in something like this and power up something like that. Done. No soldering. And again, I'll cover more of that kind of stuff in detail later. Other things that I have that I really like for 3 volts, their capacity is fairly low, but there's things like this. This is a coin cell battery pack, and you may have seen these battery packs. I think they're called CR2032s, but they'll just fit inside here, and then you can close this, and once again, it has a switch, on-off switch, that you can use to control it. Specifically, I actually use that in here. This is, again, the Goblin Slayer helmet, and if I turn that on, you can see the light shining through there, and it's seriously just that. This tiny little battery pack with a magnet on there, and then this light is actually held on with magnets as well, and you can see when I take that off just how bright it is again. And yeah, once again, super bright, kind of blinding, just a tiny little battery pack in there. There's something similar to that too, like this. This is actually a 6-volt because it has 2 of those battery pack, or 2 of those little coin cell batteries. Each of the coin cell batteries is 3 volts, so you put 2 of those in there, you get 6 volts out. So something like this could, in theory, power one of these strips. Downside is, I don't know how long that's going to last. It might last a little while, so if you're willing to bring a bunch of replacement coin cell batteries with you, and have them in your pocket or whatever, whenever the lights go out, give it a switch, you could do that, and you could power this off of this, and it would work. And it would be really good to just tuck away and hide somewhere. Now, if you want larger juice for things, you can start going up stuff like this. Again, it's the AA battery packs, and it's just more. You can get them in Gesundheit. That was Elfie over there. Anyways, you can get them in 2, 3. I think you can even get them in 1. That's fine. But you wouldn't want them for a 1 AA battery for the stuff we're talking about. But yeah, it's 4, and again, a little pack here that put them in there, and there's a switch on it. There's lots of these kind of things out there that will make your life easier and less intimidating. One that's fun is this one. This is what I actually use in FCG to power his voice. This is a 12-volt pack that holds 8 AA batteries. So it's got a lot of power coming out of it. There's even that kind of stuff for, say, 9 volts. So things like this, like little 9-volt connectors with the pigtails, or 9-volt connectors with the barrel, or the 9-volt, once again, with just this here and a switch. And this is basically what I use, again, with FCG. There's this here that just velcros onto a spot inside his chest, and this goes doink down there, turn this switch on, and we're good to go. So those there are some of your battery pack options. You can go everything from the power banks of varying sizes. Again, those will generally put out 5 volts, unless you have something to step the power down. Sometimes they'll put out even more, so again, be careful, watch that. Or just all of these battery packs here. It really comes down to capacity for some of these things, as I said. So I don't know how long this is going to last. I haven't actually tested it yet. I will do that, but I do know I used something like this for the light that's in the Fern lantern that I had mentioned earlier with the other lights. With these ones here. I don't think I've had to replace the batteries. I might have replaced them once, and we've done that through 2-3 conventions now. I forget how many, but it's lasted a while, and I'm not going to lie, it lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. So it really is just a matter of testing or bringing backup batteries for when the battery dies. That's all. Okay, so now on to the fun part, and that is the wiring, the logic, the other little tips and tricks that I might be able to give you to avoid soldering. You won't be able to avoid it completely for some things, but I'll try to help you avoid it as much as you can. I'll be covering switches, the wiring, and everything else in the next session. So let's get to it. Okay, let's try switches and logic. So first thing, switches generally come in momentary and toggle. Momentary just means when you push a button, you have to hold it down to make it do something, and then when you let it go, it goes back to where it was. Toggle means pretty self-explanatory. It toggles on and off. So you push that, you can leave it, you can hold it, push it back, it goes there. There's also magnetic switches, like this. So it'd be a similar thing, except when you bring a magnet close enough, it will activate or deactivate. Which brings me to the fact there are also switches. They're referred to as normally open and normally closed. So a normally open switch is what I think we're most familiar with. So if you have, say, power here and it's going to a light, that switch is normally open, say like this, and then you have your light. And the light won't turn on until you hit this switch. Now, normally closed would be like this, and then to the light. And the moment you turn power on, it will turn the light on. And when you push the button, it'll actually turn the light off. So that's what the difference between. So that's normally closed, and that's normally open. That's what those are, and the differences between them. And that will be important in a second, because another type of switch that's actually very useful is called a single pull double throw. And that's what these ones are, right here. Normally when you see a switch, it's got 2 connections on it. And again, all it's doing is breaking up the circuit. So wire goes in here, and then goes out the other side there. Very simple, super simple switches. These ones are a little bit more fun. These ones, there we go. So you can see they have a C and an NO for normally open, and NC for normally closed. C is the common. Normally open is, as I was saying before, a normally open connection. NC is a normally closed connection. That means is when you hit this switch, single pull, it does 2 different things. Double throw. The normally open will now be closed, and the normally closed will now be open, which this means you can have 2 different things happening off of one switch. So it's a minor programming without programming through like Arduino and stuff like that. I'll explain this a little bit better through a diagram for you real quick here. So again, if we have power, and then you have your positive and your negative connections. And that you will see, again, on these power things that I mentioned before, the battery packs that I mentioned before. The black is going to be your negative, and the red is going to be your positive. And one thing I didn't show you guys earlier that I should have is things like this. So these are USB connections with little pigtails that have the black and the red on them. You can get them in USB, USB-C, and they'll plug into a power bank, and then you can use those specifically to power stuff. You can also, as long as you know it's not a data cable, you can get old charging cables, like USB charging cables, and get one like this. As you can see, it has the red and the black inside it, and then you can strip this down, and which I'll touch on later, and then use the black and the red wires and this line here straight into a USB power bank, and often power whatever you like those 5-volt batteries or 5-volt LEDs. So, basic circuit. You have your switch that I mentioned before. So you go from your negative, you go into a switch, and then that goes off into the light. And your light is going to have a negative and a positive connection. So you'll take from negative to a switch to the negative, and then from the positive on the light back to the positive on your power. It's that simple for this kind of logic. Where then when you push the button, light turns on, let go of the button if it's a momentary, and then light turns back off, or flip the toggle if it's a toggle, light turns back off. Now for the single pull double throw, and this is what we have for FCG's eyes, by the way. So it's the toggle version of a single pull double throw. And that makes it so that his eyes are normally blue, and if I flip the switch, his eyes will turn red. So this will be, again, another power. We go here like this. There's your positive, there's your negative. So the negative would come out and go to, if you remember, there was the C and normally open and normally closed. So this would come up to the C on the switch, and then you have your normally open line that comes out and your normally closed line that comes out. And those would go to the negatives on the lights. You have your negative here, and you have your negative here. And then you have your positives. These would come up from the positives, and then you would actually take these two positive lines, these two red lines, and you would have to twist them together or solder them together with another red line. So you have basically a three-way connection here, like this. And then that red line continues on back into the power. So now, whenever you turn this power on, what will happen is on the normally closed, the common line with the electricity will come in through here, up through the common, and then down through the normally closed, and back up to this light, and then continue the circuit, turning that light on. This will come on, this one won't. The moment you hit the switch, be it momentary or toggle, then the normally open will now close. The normally closed will now open. This particular part of the circuit is now dead. This gets energized, and then this completes the circuit. This light turns on. So you can effectively program two lights to turn one's on, one's off, and without any sort of Arduino programming. And there's ways to get really creative with it without having to do any sort of programming. You can run things through multiple switches and have some fun with it. But really, that's the I would say least complicated way to get something like that to work. So that is the very basic of the programming or programming of the wiring logics and like circuit logics and stuff like that. Next, we can cover the soldering or not soldering of wires, how you can get around soldering, and if you can't get around soldering, the basic idea of how to do that. I'm not going to do a soldering demonstration unless people really want me to, because there are a lot of videos on YouTube already that have soldering videos or how-tos and things like that. It's not terribly difficult, but it's definitely a patience thing for sure. And assuming you have steady hands. If you don't have steady hands, the non-soldering options are really going to be nice. So, anyways, let's move on to the next step. Okay, let's cover the next section, and that would be the wiring using lots of different things. So soldering is the most basic means of soldering wires together or connecting wires together without soldering. And I'm also going to cover the ways to basically make connectors, because there's lots of different connectors, fairly basic ones. One's called JIC. There's like Deutsch connectors. There's all sorts of different names. It gets kind of ridiculous, but won't be covering the whole gamut of them. We'll just be covering some of them and some of the tricks to avoid soldering. So first thing is actually getting your wires ready for soldering or not soldering. Actually, you know what? Let me turn that light on. There we go. Hey, now we can all see. So one thing you'll need to do is make sure you get your wires taken apart. So you want to make sure they're either going to be two separate wires or they're going to be ones like this that are joined together that you're going to then strip. There's a few different kinds of wire strippers. There's some where you can actually, okay, light doesn't want to stay out. There are some where you can actually put it over top of the wire and it goes a very specific length so that when you close the wire stripper, it just pops that much off. I don't personally use those. What I do use is something like this. And that shows the wire gauge on here that you would be trying to cut, which is going to be very important for a number of things. Like, you need to know what your wire gauge is. If you use too thick of a wire gauge, then you won't really be able to run power through your line, because then the gauge is too thick, it resists too much energy. So for most of the stuff that you're going to be doing for cosplay, you just need thin stuff like this, a fairly light gauge. So as you can see, maybe, come on, focus, please. There we go. So you can see, maybe, there we go. So you can see the gauges, as the number on the gauge gets smaller, the wire gets bigger. Normally I work with around 20, 22 gauge. So that is what you'll see here. So if I put this through, oh man, this is hard to do at the same time. So if I put this through here, just a certain distance, just to get enough exposed wire, close that, pull that through, and then wire's exposed. And a little bit of cable is left behind there. Now, if I had a thicker wire and then I tried doing that on the smaller gauge, I'd just cut the wire. That is not what we want. So be the same thing here, go to about approximately the same amount, about there, give that a pull, and boop, wire's exposed. So basic wire stripping is that right there. So I'll cover some of the soldering logic. I don't even know how to consider that, but basically what a soldering iron kind of is. So you have, this is a very basic soldering iron. Adjust the power of the soldering iron. For example, on something like this, you don't need to crank it all the way up. You just need to go high enough to melt solder, which is usually maybe around the halfway mark on something like this. There's a variety of different tips, but for the kind of stuff that you're going to be doing, the smaller, pointier, stabbier tips are really, oh, come on, focus, are really all you're probably going to need. And if you get them any fatter, then it's going to be kind of hard to actually apply the heat where it needs to go. These also usually come with these brass solder cleaning things, so that when you haven't too much solder on here, you can just jam that in there, get the solder cleaned off. So that's the basic stuff for soldering. Again, if people really want, I can do a soldering demonstration, but again, there's a ton of them out there already. But what you may really want, no matter if you're soldering or not, is something like this. This is called a helping hand. You can get them in various complexities or sizes. This one's a fairly complex one that has, hold on, that has a light and a magnifying glass and other stuff on it. But mostly what you're looking for is helping hands that have something like these on them, little clips. So what you can do is you can hold on to your wires while you're doing some of the soldering. So we can do that, hold on to that. Oh, come on, focus. Thank you. So you can hold on to that wire while, say, this one holds on to something else, like, say, one of the lights, or the switches. So let's use this for an example here just to show you. So if I had some solder on some of these things here, I could use this to hold this, hold those together, ta-da, just like that. And then when I'm going to solder that, I can bring the soldering iron in here and then just very gently solder those two things together with my hands free. These things are absolutely invaluable. Even the cheap ones, just as long as it has a couple, like some clips, even if it's just like 2 arms to hold some things together. Yeah. So if you were to look for wiring helping hands or um, wiring assist kit or something like that, you'll probably find something. Other things you can do though, so aside from soldering, one neat little thing, first of all, are these. These are basically wire sealing tubes. These are also listed by, excuse me, these are also listed by the gauge as well. So you got to be careful about that. So if you were to buy these not thinking and you were to get this at too large or too small of a gauge, it's not going to do what you want it to do. But what you do is, let's just grab some wires here. So you can take this here, what it is, what it looks like, and you would put one wire in like that. Come on, get in there. So you put one wire in like that until the exposed wire is at that solder in the middle. And then you would take another one, also push that in there until it gets to about, oh, come on, focus. Until it gets to about that point as well. And then you can use a heat gun. You can also use you can even use like an open flame, like a lighter or something like that, as long as you're far enough away and you don't literally melt this thing. But you're basically just going to heat shrink this and slightly heat up the solder that's inside, and then it's going to close itself over top of the wire. It's a pretty easy way to do non-soldering methods, but like with all things soldering and otherwise, once this is done, give it a pull, because you don't want to not give it a pull and find out later when you're at a convention and you give it a tug, this comes out, then now what? So every time you do some sort of soldering and connections, give them a tug. Make sure they're secure. Let's see. There's other things out there as well, like there are mechanical connections. I forget the name off the top of my head now, but there are various ways that you can connect some things without using solder that are, how should I put it, mechanical. I'm going to try to put up a picture instead of trying to explain this right now. So there'll be a picture or something like that over top of here to kind of show you an example of what I'm talking about, of things that you can do instead of soldering as well, instead of those things, because I don't have any on me, unfortunately. One neat little thing, though, for those, remember these light strips that I mentioned before? Yeah, there we go, earlier in the video. There's some fun things that you can do for this. There are these. So instead of soldering, you can oh, come on, focus. So there are these here. So because there's these connections, which, by the way, with the rolls, what you can do is you just take scissors and you can cut them at any length as long as they're right on these connections here. And you just cut them in half, and you can either solder them. So you put some solder on these here, so it creates like a little bubble. And then you solder the wires and everything to them and call that a day. Or you can get these. And by the way, I'm going to try to put the links to some of these things instead of just saying, hey, here's this, so that you guys can potentially find some of these things. I'm, again, not affiliated or anything right now, but I'm just going to, try to have the links up to help you out. So this is just screwing things on. Oh, crap, where the heck did I put my screwdriver? There it is. Oh. So, yes, it's quite literally just one side is made for one of these flexible chip-on boards, light strips, and the other is made for wires. So you can see right there, that's it. So that just goes in here, and then the screw gets tightened down onto the little copper connectors, like that. And then on the other side, you would have the wires. So the ones that I just stripped earlier, you would take those. And these tell you which to do. Also, by the way, ground is equivalent to negative. Honestly, this is something I hate about electrical stuff. So ground is equivalent to negative. 5-volt is equivalent to positive. That's something else you're going to need to know when you find some of this stuff. Because if you didn't know and you looked, Oh, which negative, which is positive? Who the hell knows? So that's the answer. 5 volt positive, GND or ground is negative. So in this case, I would take the black line and put that in this side, and then screw that down. As long as I don't keep being butterfingers. Nope. Nope, that was not tight enough. See? Give things a pull. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. I think I need to put that South Park meme over top of that after saying that. There we go. That's nice and secure. And then this one here. Come on, focus. There we go. Nope. Once again. Okay. So that's it. Instead of fighting with your soldering iron and stuff like that, there. And that would be your connection. So that could be like the USB pigtails that I mentioned to you before. That could be coming from a power bank to the pigtails, the black and red, into this. And then you put your light onto here. And now your light runs there, and you don't even need a switch. You just need to turn on your power bank. You could put a switch in between here, which would definitely require soldering. Or you could just not. And as soon as you plug the power bank in, this sucker lights up. And then you turn the power bank off if you don't want it to be on, and so on. So this is fantastic for these particular strips. Lifesaver. For when you are having to solder, though, because you will definitely need to solder 2 switches. I don't really know any other way around it. You can imagine, again, the switches earlier, you can imagine, good luck, trying to use that little shrink tube I showed you earlier. That's not happening. So on these here, you just, you put the wire through and solder it on, and then move on. Another thing you will definitely need when you're going to be doing soldering are these. These are heat shrink tubes. So if you're soldering something, say to the strips, that leaves them exposed. If 2 metal contacts, for some reason, the positive and the negative, touch each other, you're going to cause a short. That, depending on the battery you're using, depending on what you're using, that could maybe even cause a fire. So you don't want that. So these here shrink tubes, they go over top of these wires from earlier. Let me just grab that now. Unscrew that. So what you would do in the case of when you were soldering, you would cut a small piece of this off. You would put it over top of this wire ahead of time. Oop, oop, oop. This is very hard to do when I'm trying to look to the phone camera. So if you put over top earlier, so like let's say this is only about big. You'd slide it over top, slide it down a bit, and you need enough to cover the exposed wire. But you slide it down a bit, do your soldering, connect that together, bring the heat shrink back up over top of the exposed wire, and then again use a slightly open flame or a heat gun or something like that to then heat shrink this over top of the wire, and now you no longer have an exposed wire or the risk of a short. So definitely get heat shrink. That is pretty much a non-negotiable. That's something that you will need. Now for things like connection. So let's say you have a very long wire. You're doing an armor build, and your battery pack is, say, somewhere on your back or on your waist. The light that you're lighting up is, say, somewhere in your helmet, or something like that, or further along in parts that you want to take off. You will need connections, and you'll need to be able to take things apart and put them together, and the wires for that. Here's the most basic of those connections. You have these here. These are very simple, basic things that would normally go into like circuit boards, etc., etc. So just these tiny little connection things. Now, the way this works is you would put so this is the female or receiving end, and then you have the male. Come on out. Here. So you'd end up just snapping one of these off for one side of the connection. You need obviously two of them for your positive and your negative, and then you need two of these for the other positive and negative. And you would just, at that point, you need a crimping tool like this here. Or honestly, you can use just small needle nose pliers. But what you would do is just move this back and forth until it snaps off. You put, oh, come on. You put this wire and slide it in here like that. And then you would use a crimping tool or needle nose pliers to close that up around the wire. I'm going to use the crimping tool in this example. Close that up around the wire. Let me get that. Give that a squeeze. That a squeeze. It's very hard to do on the camera. Just make sure it's nice and rounded so it can actually fit inside that connection. Then this, oh, come on, focus. So this, go in here. You see this open side. That's important. This side with all the mess, let's call it, needs to be on the open side of this one. Because what's going to happen is when you push this in here, it's going to go in, whoop, come on. And this is why these things are a little bit fiddly. So I didn't squeeze it down enough. Let's do that. Come on. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, you kind of need these in some cases to make proper connections. So if you find that things are going to go far enough that you have to disconnect and reconnect things this way, it's good to get used to learning a crimping tool and learning stuff like this. Pretty valuable. There we go. See, it went through. So you keep pushing that through, and eventually that's going to click. And now you shouldn't be able to pull it back out when it gets to a certain point, because this little bit of plastic, come on, focus. This little bit of plastic will close down over top of that. And so when it tries to get pushed back out, it catches on that, and now it's stuck. Unless you get something in there to pop that up and then slide that back out. And it'll be the same thing for this black, the black line. And then you'll just do the female other connections for the other side and the other connector. And then you can just take those and push those together. For FCG and his voice, I had 9 different connections, which means 18 different wires coming out of that. So you can imagine how kind of ridiculous that was. So it was something like this. So I had to put all those, connections in there and something similar to this so that I could just push them together. There are better connectors for that, I will be honest. I just didn't use them. I may change that for the future. And speaking of better connectors, the problems with these is that, as you can see, there's no real latch to keep those stuck together. If something pulls them, they're coming apart. So there are similar connections, and again, having to use crimping tools. There are similar things like this, which I obviously have not opened yet because that is still taped together. Please bear with me while I actually get this open. There we go. It's like Christmas. So there's these here. It's a similar thing. You have your male and female connections. Come on. There we go. So you have like these here, same things. But these actually snap together. So you can see how these would come together. In theory, apparently. There we go. I had that the wrong way. So you'd slide that together, and then those would snap together. And they're not coming apart until you want them to, like that. And those also come in multi-size things. So you can see here, you got that many there. So there's a 9 connector. So this is something I could potentially use for the FCG's voice. The 9 positives connect to another 9 positives, and the 9 negatives connecting to another 9 negatives, and using something like this to keep them together. Actually, is there a double in here? No, there's not. But there's things like that. But those are necessary for the connections over longer distances. Again, if you need to separate them for some reason, those are pretty necessary. What else is there? I feel like I'm forgetting something. No, you know what? I don't think I am. Nope, that should be it. I believe that's a pretty, very basic, if I'm being honest, run through of connections, wires, splicing, things like that. Um, if, as usual, with so many of these things, if you have any questions, if I didn't cover something you want to cover, please ask me in the comments or what have you, because I'm sure I missed something or you have other questions. So now with that, I do want to cover a couple other things. So I'm going to cover cable management, which is a nightmare. Most people leave that as an afterthought if they do it at all. I am guilty of that. Terrible for cable management, but I will show you some things that are good for cable management, tie wraps, etc. And then I might briefly touch on things like diffusion and stuff like that, because somebody did ask me about that. But honestly, that's not really related to the electrical. It's just a quick cover. So that'll be the last thing that we cover, and that's coming up next. Okay, the last thing, and that would be cable management. Nobody likes this. Everybody, well, isn't everybody? A lot of people tend to forget about this until you wish you hadn't. So, what I tend to use is inside things. There's these little sticky mounts specifically for plastic um, cable ties. So, this is the simplest method, just putting things like this where you can inside something, and then using the plastic cable ties, and boop, put that through there, and you can put your wires through there, tie them down. Downside, if you want to take that apart, you need to clip it. You need to cut it, and then you need to put another one on there. A solution for that is slightly larger versions of these, perhaps, and these wonderful things. These are Velcro cable ties, and they're obviously very reusable. You can use them at home, use them in your cosplay stuff, so you can just put this through here, tighten that up, and wrap that around there, and that sticks on itself. And then for some reason you need to take it off, you can, and you don't have to cut it. These are great. I can't recommend them enough, and they usually come in in kits that also have cable sleeves, which I don't have right now. But I'm gonna again throw up a picture about that so you can see the cable sleeves and the kits they come with. These things are pretty good if you really want to wrap up your wires and make sure there's nothing dangling out. Those are very useful. Honestly, that's the quick and dirty about cable management. These are all that stuff is pretty much it. Just use cable ties, find a way to anchor them down to something with something similar to this, or anything really that you can tie that to. Even if it's actually just tying all the cables and making them in one bundle that run up something, then that can work as well. The last thing, somebody did ask me about diffusing the lights, as I mentioned earlier. Really, if you go back to the initial example pictures at the beginning of this video, it's really either just 3D printed transparent PETG or PLA, but basically transparent prints in some cases, and it doesn't need to be very thick. The thicker it is, obviously, the more wall, the more you'll diffuse. But you really only need something quite thin to diffuse it, and then potentially have the LEDs just a bit back from the from that print. Also, it's really good instead of having the LEDs and the lights facing straight at them, like I do with FCG's eyes. It's a cylinder, and so the lights kind of go around the cylinder, and they don't point right out the eye. They kind of the light, I guess you could say, shines sideways instead of forward, which is again why those chip-on board lights are really good, because they're really bright and they shine in every direction really well instead of just straight up at best. Another diffusion thing is actually LED foam. I think it's also called, oh shoot, the name has escaped me now, but there's a name for it. But yeah, you can get LED foam in various thicknesses, and that is what's used in the uh, mercury hammer. So on the staff part going up and down there, and also in the head where you have the spinning cogs, that is all LED foam. It's just, I think, like 3 mil thick or something like that. And again, the lights are kind of set back inside, or they're not shining directly out, or what have you. Those are the only ways I really diffuse lights. That's it. It's not really that big of a magic trick. Okay, that should be the end of the video. Finally, holy crap, it's like an hour. Hopefully this is helpful. If there's any other questions you have, please ask them in the comments. If there's a need to make another video about this kind of stuff or to expand on things, I'll be happy to do so, depending on what people ask for. Yeah, if you made it to the end of this, thank you very much for sticking around. And again, I hope this was helpful. Bye for now.